Hello and welcome to this Lightroom 5 tutorial where we're going to be looking at this basic control panel here and how to get this kind of image from this one. So to start with, we've imported the image and I've got a few different ones in a collection down here. And we're going to start with this first one where I've shot this church but deliberately exposed the photo for the sky and the clouds. Because of that, of course, you can see there's very little detail in this foreground, and we're going to use this slider panel to see how we can fix that. So starting from the top, in just this basic panel, you've got two options there, colour and black and white. Pretty self-explanatory. If you click on that black and white, you'll be given a black and white mix, and these HSL and colour options lower down will be greyed out. We're going to stick with colour for now. So starting at the very top, you've got temperature and tint. We're going to come back to those after getting our first middle exposure. The exposure slider here, just grab and slide left and right to affect your mid-tones in your photo. If you want to know where your mid-tones are, you can also change the exposure by grabbing and dragging up here directly in the histogram. We'll just reset that for now by double-clicking exposure. So to start with, if I set a good middle point, I can see that most of my histogram is over to the left. I'm going to grab that exposure slider and tweak it up just a touch. I don't want to blow those clouds out. The next one down is contrast. If we go all the way to the left, we're going to get a pretty greyed out image. All the way to the right, we're going to push those extreme highlights and shadows. Just for now, I'm going to leave that where it is. I can get it back to 0 again by double clicking. So with the highlights, again, the highlights in this section of the histogram, you can see we've got lots of information. I don't want to lose that, but I am going to set those up just to be a little bit darker for now. The next one being the shadows. This is where we're going to bring all of this information back in off the church. So we're going to grab that shadow slider, we're going to bring it up until we're happy. Now in this high contrast situation, probably need to go almost all the way to the top. But in fact at that point I'm seeing that the whole image isn't going to be bright enough for me, so I'm going to bring it down a little bit and go back now to the exposure slider. As I pull that up, I can get that much closer to how it really looked on the day. And if I think my clouds are too bright again, I can just tweak down there with the highlights. The next slider down, the whites slider. This affects this very far edge here and is just setting your actual white point. So if I turn them up a touch, you can see the clouds are getting brighter, but I'm keeping a lot of that range in there because it's not affecting the shadows. Watching the histogram up here, I don't want to get it right to the right edge, so I'll just leave it where it is there. The next slider down, the black point, I can see on the histogram the blacks are actually going slightly off the side, and if I want to see them I can hover over this in the top left or click it if I want to keep the areas that are pure black highlighted. If I want, I can lose that crushing black by just moving my black slider up slightly. I'm going to move it just to the point where I can see a bit of black and then leave it there. If I turn the highlight up, we'll be able to see that I've got the clipping enabled on the top right here. If I click and let go, I can see where those whites are being clipped or where they're turning to pure white with no information. Ideally, I don't want any of that on screen. Okay, so that's that area sorted out and the picture's now looking a lot better. If I want, I can play with the next slider, which is clarity. Now, you want to be a little bit careful with this. I see a lot of companies offering wedding images that look like this. Really crunchy and they don't print well, although they do look very good on the web. That over sharpening, and if we can see, if we go right in and play with this clarity slider, what we're really doing is affecting micro contrast in the image. So we're putting, if we've got a light meeting a dark surface, it's adding extra light surface on the outside of the dark and extra dark surfaces on the outside of the light, so we actually do start to get halos around our images. I don't like to push the clarity too much, but on an image like this with all this stonework, we can add just a touch if we wanted to pop. Our next two sliders, Vibrance and Saturation. Saturation is exactly what it says on the tin. It's just going to turn all of your colours up. All the way down will be black and white, all the way up will be quite an unrealistic looking picture generally. Double click to reset to 0. Vibrance works a little bit differently to saturation. Vibrance will boost the colours that aren't very saturated in your image and leave the ones that are fully saturated alone a little bit. It's a bit like a fill light for colour. It also tends to leave skin tones alone, so as we boost it here we can see that the green and the blue are really coming out, but as the building is a little bit orange we're going to pull it back and just dial it into where we want. Now that we've got our basic levels sorted out, I'm going to go back to temperature. Now I'm working with a raw file, a Nikon NEF from a Nikon D750, which means that I can select the colour balance on this photo. With a JPEG it won't work quite so well. By grabbing this colour slider and going all the way to the left, we can make the picture colder, or to the right we're going to make the picture warmer. One great feature here is the dropper, so if we pick our dropper here we can now pick anywhere on the photo that's a neutral shade, that is a black, a grey or a white. If we base it say on the clouds, which are largely white, I'm going to get a bit of a click in there, it should then balance that colour for us. If you're not sure of this you can of course just move the slider until you're happy, but in this instance using the white balance picker on a bit of cloud is great. There is still a little bit of a green cast in this image, you can see it a little bit in the brickwork, and this is where the tint comes in. If I nudge this slightly to the right, a bit of pink is going to neutralise that green, and there's our final picture. Okay, so now we're going to move on to a portrait shot that's not quite as extreme. We should be able to fly through these now. So we're going to look at our histogram at the top and see that we're all within our boundaries, but quite a lot of our information is down here in the shadows and the exposure region. So we're going to start with exposure until we're happy with the skin tones. It's a good way when you're working with people to start with the exposure first until the skin tone is where you want it to be. Moving down, I'll play with the contrast. In this instance, maybe just a slight tweak up. I'm going to bring the highlights down and the shadows up just because it was a very sunny day, and by doing that we've decreased the contrast. So I'm going to step back up and just tweak that a little bit more till I'm happy. Now the whites in this instance I'm okay with. The blacks I am going to bring down just a touch. Again, we can turn on that corner and just play with the blacks until we get a little bit in the image. Having just some black in there is going to help maximize the contrast in the image. Now from there we're going to just check the color temperature. I'm going to start with the color picker, find an area of the white dress, and straight away that's a lot more appealing. The sky's looking a pretty good blue. Overall there's perhaps a little bit of pink in there, so I can get on the tint and just play about with that until I'm happy. In this image as well, I am going to go in, click on the crop, and just turn it until I've got the horizon straight. Maybe pull that image in and centralize them a little bit closer to the rule of thirds. Press the crop button again to see the final image. And now down to clarity, vibrance and saturation. With people, I really wouldn't advise use clarity. Let's see what happens when we zoom in and turn the clarity up. Not a good look. So we're going to leave the clarity where it is, double click on the word to reset it. With the vibrance and the saturation, I'm going to turn the vibrance up a touch so I can really see that sky, and pull the saturation down a little bit just to take the edge off their skin. There we go. And lastly, let's take a look at this image of an Italian harbour that has loads of great little details that you wouldn't see at first. So we're going to fly through this. We've got quite a broad range all the way through our histogram. So we're going to bring the highlights down, which will allow us to turn the whole exposure up and keep that sky in there. Bringing the shadows is really going to work on this image and bring out a lot of that detail that we've missed. Tweak the contrast a little bit and I'll touch more on those shadows. Quite happy with the black point and just working with the white slider there to make sure that we're not overexposed. This image can do with a little bit more vibrance and then play with the saturation until I'm happy. This is looking nice, but overall a little bit green because of this water, so I'm going to counteract that with the tint and then warm it up ever so slightly. And there we go. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on the Lightroom Basics panel. Subscribe for more videos, and if you've got a question, get in touch.